A 73-year-old man was walking toward the gate of the army base. His plain clothes and frail body immediately caught the attention of soldiers Jackson and Rivera. "Hey, sir, where do you think you're going?" Jackson asked, blocking his way. "I came to visit a friend," Vincent Mays replied, his voice trembling. Rivera scoffed. "Sure you did." What they couldn't imagine was that the man carried more than just his visible frailty. Vincent had little time left to live. Every step he took was driven by one final resolve. And in just a few moments, an official SUV would appear on the horizon, bringing someone whose arrival would turn that moment into an everlasting memory. The morning cold cut through Vincent's fragile bones, but nothing would stop him from being there. Jackson held his ground, blocking the gate with his body. "A friend, huh?" he said in a firm tone. "You know this is a military installation. You can't just show up here and ask to walk in." Vincent met the soldier's suspicious eyes, his voice low but steady. "I didn't come here by chance." Rivera huffed impatiently. "Then say it already. Who's this friend of yours?" The old man drew a deep breath, as if speaking that name demanded more strength than he had left. "Richard Cole." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Jackson frowned, surprised. Rivera, on the other hand, burst out laughing. "You've got to be kidding me," he mocked. "You think you can just walk up to the gate and ask to see the base commander?" Vincent didn't answer. He simply held his gaze, tired but resolute. Jackson, more cautious, asked, "And your name?" "Vincent Mays," he said slowly. "I served in the army decades ago, and today I need to speak with my friend Richard." Jackson repeated the name as if testing its weight, then quickly reached for the radio on his shoulder. "This is Jackson, main gate. We have an elderly man identifying himself as Vincent Mays. He claims to have served and is requesting to speak with General Cole. Requesting confirmation. Over." The radio crackled, but no response came. Jackson lowered it, growing impatient. "Central's taking too long to answer. You'll have to wait here until we get authorization." Vincent nodded silently. His feet and back ached, so he leaned against the iron gate for support. The cold metal made him shiver, but he didn't move. Rivera glanced sideways at his partner, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is a waste of time, Jackson. He's just another old man making up a story." Vincent heard it, but stayed quiet. He only adjusted his grip on the gate, trying to steady the weight of his weary body. His silence seemed more unsettling than if he had spoken. Jackson kept his stern look, but something about Vincent made him hesitate. Still, he couldn't bend the rules. Until Central confirms, no one goes in. "That's the protocol." Rivera stepped closer, glaring down at Vincent. "Do you have any kind of ID to prove who you are?" he asked harshly. It took Vincent a moment to move his hand to the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, marked by decades of use. Slowly, he opened it and drew out an old card. Its photo faded, its corners bent. "This is all I have." Jackson took the card from him and examined it carefully. The signature, the old crest, the aligned details. He wasn't sure how official it still was, but he couldn't bring himself to dismiss it. "We'll wait for confirmation," he said, handing the card back to Vincent. The old man tucked it away with care, as though it were a piece of his own history. Then he leaned back on the gate. The cold grew sharper and the wind stung his eyes. Rivera sighed impatiently. "I bet in a moment they'll confirm they've never even heard of this Mays guy." Jackson tried the radio again. Once more, only static. Time seemed to drag on. Each minute weighed heavier on Vincent's shoulders as he fought against his own frailty. The weight stretched on, unyielding, as if the very gate itself were testing how long Vincent could endure. Time seemed to stand still. The cold wind cut across Vincent's face. The flag above cracked sharply in the air, and the distant sounds of the base's routine reached the gate in muffled echoes. Jackson fiddled with the radio again, trying to get a response, while Rivera drummed his fingers against his uniform, clearly irritated by the weight. Vincent stood his ground, though his short breaths betrayed the effort. His wrinkled hands clutched the iron bars as if the structure could hold him, not just physically, but emotionally. Rivera broke the silence with a humorless laugh. Well, nothing yet. I bet Central didn't even recognize your name. Vincent lifted his eyes, without anger. I didn't come here to convince you, boys. I came because I needed to be here one last time. The words lingered in the air, uncomfortable. Jackson turned his gaze away for a moment, as if he had glimpsed something beyond the frail figure before him. But he said nothing. Then a low rumble began to rise from the road. The deep growl of an engine grew louder with every second. Both soldiers straightened instinctively. Rivera adjusted his grip on the rifle, holding it closer to his chest. A black SUV with tinted windows approached at speed. Its headlights cut through the morning light, giving the vehicle a commanding presence. Vincent raised his face, straining to see past the glare. His fragile heart seemed to pound harder. The SUV slowed and stopped just a few yards from the gate. The soldiers snapped to full alert. Jackson lifted his hand in a gesture of recognition and respect. Rivera swallowed hard, his stance suddenly rigid. The back door opened with a sharp click. A pair of black boots touched the ground. Emerging from the vehicle was a man in uniform, his insignia glinting faintly in the sunlight. His short gray hair and upright bearing betrayed the authority of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. It was General Richard Cole. Both soldiers raised their hands to their brows in salute. Rivera, still stunned, took half a second longer, caught off guard by the commander's sudden arrival. But Richard didn't return the gesture. His eyes, stern yet shimmering with emotion, were fixed on only one person, the old man leaning against the gate, Vincent. For a few seconds, time itself seemed suspended. The wind stilled, the world shrank, and only the two friends remained, separated by decades. Richard walked quickly, speaking to no one. He stopped at the gate just a few steps from Vincent. The hardened mask of a commander dissolved, replaced by a restrained but powerful emotion. The general raised his hand to his brow and gave a salute. It was firm, solemn, filled with respect and memory. Rivera's eyes widened. The disdain he'd felt minutes earlier vanished like smoke. Jackson stood frozen, watching in absolute silence. Vincent tried to lift his hand to return the salute, but his arm was too heavy. The trembling, incomplete motion was enough for Richard to close the distance. He stepped forward, took his old friend's arm and pulled him into a tight embrace, as if decades of absence could be dissolved in that single moment. "Vincent," he murmured, his voice breaking. The old man gave a faint smile, eyes brimming with tears. "I couldn't leave without seeing you, my friend Richard." The gate still separated them until Richard turned to the soldiers. His voice came out deep, with an authority that allowed no reply. "Open it, now." Jackson hurried to obey, pressing the control. The iron gate creaked as it moved, groaning, as if it recognized the weight of the moment. Richard didn't wait. He slid an arm around Vincent's frail body, holding him steady. "Come on, brother. You're home." Vincent nodded in silence. His steps were unsteady but strengthened by the general's arm at his side. Together they crossed into the base. Behind them, Rivera stood frozen, still trying to process what he had just seen. The same man he had dismissed as a fraud minutes earlier was being welcomed as family by the commander. A sting of shame hit him, but he dared not say a word. Jackson, more composed, watched with respect. He realized he had just witnessed something rare, one of those stories that would be whispered for years at the gates of the base. Vincent, supported by Richard's steady arm, walked with difficulty, yet with a deep calm. Every step beside his friend was a victory against the illness consuming his life. The friendship that time had tried to bury was restored before everyone's eyes, with the power of a single gesture, one salute. And in that moment, without words, they all knew they were witnessing something that went far beyond protocol. A few minutes later, already inside the base, Richard guided Vincent down a corridor. The polished floor reflected the harsh lights above. Old photographs lined the walls, graduations, ceremonies, smiling faces. Vincent walked slowly, leaning on his friend's arm. They stopped in front of a wooden door. The general opened it and the two stepped inside. It was a modest office, but full of history. A wide desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf with folders and books, a folded flag resting on a side table. There was also a framed photo, 2 young men smiling, shoulder to shoulder, covered in dust. Richard picked up the frame and held it closer to Vincent. "Remember this day?" he asked with a weary smile. Vincent squinted, then a brief, genuine smile broke across his face. "That night exercise, we thought the rain would last half an hour. It poured for 6. "And you insisted on keeping the full watch anyway," Richard said, shaking his head. "I complained, you laughed, and we stayed there, soaked, joking that the sky had mixed up the seasons." Their laughter was quiet, almost like a breath. Then silence returned, though softer this time. Richard pulled out a chair for his friend, set a blanket across the backrest, and poured him some coffee. Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he held the cup. "It's strong," he said, tasting it. "Just the way I liked it when the nights felt too long." Richard stood, almost instinctively lowering the blinds halfway. The light in the room dimmed, wrapping their conversation in a kind of protection. He sat back down, closer this time. "You remember Sergeant Jones?" he asked, looking for air in the memory. "I do. He wrote to me last month. He's retired now, growing tomatoes." The stories began to flow like warm stones emptied from their pockets. The first patrol that went wrong but turned into a lesson. The night the power went out in the barracks, and they improvised a feast with forgotten cans, the nickname a lieutenant earned and never lost. Each memory reflected who they had been together. Partners, stubborn, loyal. "You know what I envied in you?" Richard said after a while. "That calm of yours. When things felt too dangerous, you'd shrink the problem down until it fit in your hand." "It wasn't calm," Vincent corrected gently. "It was fear, tamed slowly. You learned to talk to it." Another silence followed, this one heavy with unspoken truths. Richard placed a hand quickly on the table. "There's something I need to show you," the general said, standing. "Come with me." They left the office and turned down the corridor. A glass door opened into a bright atrium. On one wall stretched rows of plaques, names etched into metal, dates, brief tributes. The air itself felt heavier, more reverent. Richard led Vincent toward the central plaques. It was the unit's memorial, everyone who had served, arranged year by year. "I wanted it this way," Richard explained. "A place where no one would be forgotten." Vincent leaned closer, tracing the names with his fingers. He recognized surnames, paused at 2 or 3, murmuring memories. Then he found his own name, engraved in the metal. He stood before it for long seconds. "I don't want you to tire yourself," Richard said softly. "Want to sit down?" "Let me look one more minute," Vincent replied. "Then we'll have another coffee." They returned to the office afterward. Richard asked someone to bring them something light to eat and canceled the rest of his morning with 2 quick calls. He silenced his phone and slipped it into his pocket. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. Nothing else mattered right now. The general drew a deep breath as though bracing for a confession. "I was always busy," he admitted. "There was always a report, a meeting, an inspection, and every time you called, I said next week. I let next week turn into years. I failed you, Vincent." The old man didn't rush to answer. He set his cup carefully on the saucer, breathing slowly, as though picking words from a bag of memories. "Life has a strange way of cutting paths," he said at last. "Just when we think we're steady, it changes course, and mine is reaching the end." Richard's eyes welled. "You really are—" He couldn't finish. Vincent gave a small nod. "The doctor was honest with me. The cancer is advanced. Time doesn't like to negotiate." Richard pressed his elbows to the table, hands clasped, jaw tense. "I should have gone to you every one of these past weeks." "I didn't come to collect debts," Vincent replied. "I came to thank you. We served and fought together. You were the best man at my wedding. You were my best friend, like the saying goes, some friends are closer than brothers." "Let's take a short drive around the base," Richard suggested. "I want to see the training field," Vincent said. The afternoon light began to shift, stretching shadows across the grounds. Richard glanced at his watch, only to put it away again. There was no rush. He knew this day had to fit entirely into a single memory. They stood side by side in silence, watching the training field as if waiting for the past to come alive again. Young men running, shouts of orders ringing out, yet joy echoing in the air. For a moment, it felt like it was all still there, suspended. By the time they returned to the car, night was already falling. At the gate, Jackson and Rivera were still on duty. Both straightened as they saw the General and Vincent together. Richard stepped out to help his friend. Before getting into the car that would take him away, Vincent spoke. "Thank you for letting me see the Army base where I learned everything I know, one last time." "Thank you," Richard replied, his voice breaking, "for everything you did for our country, and for me. I couldn't have asked for a better friend than Vincent Mays." Those were the last words they ever exchanged, the last time they saw each other. The news came days later, early in the morning. Richard was in his office reviewing reports when the call came. A few seconds of silence, just breathing on the other end. Then the blunt words, "Vincent was gone." The General set his pen down on the desk, drained of strength, his eyes fixed on a blank spot on the wall. He sat motionless, hearing only the echo of his own breathing. Slowly, he opened the bottom drawer and took out a small box. Inside was the same old photograph, the two of them, shoulder to shoulder, covered in dust. He held it in both hands, as if it were sacred. The military funeral was held on a clear morning, the sky wide open, a light breeze moving through the trees. The American flag lay over the casket in solemn precision. Soldiers stood in formation. The bugle's call pierced the air, painfully pure. Richard stood at the front. His hands were steady, but his eyes glistened. When he received the folded flag, his gesture was restrained, reverent. Kneeling before the family, he handed it over with only a few words, his voice unsteady. "With the honors of the nation, and with my own." He rose, took a deep breath. His salute lasted long seconds, longer than protocol required. Tears slipped down, discreet, without lowering his hand. It was the highest tribute he could give, to weep without breaking his honor. When he finally lowered his hand, the world seemed to find its sound again. The procession moved forward, slowly. Richard followed a few steps behind, all the way to the end. In the silence of the cemetery, before the endless horizon of stones and engraved names, he understood. Friendship survives everything, but lost time never returns. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.